Um, our first speaker is Dr. Joe Smith. He did his undergrad in electronic engineering at UCL, which is the same degree I did. So it's funny that we both ended up studying at the University of Bristol. After his MEng, he worked at CERN and MIT before starting his PhD at the Quantum Engineering Center for Doctoral Training. He did his PhD on NV centers as a scalable platform for single photon sources, and he's now carrying on this research as a postdoctoral researcher. And his talk will be about his experiences as a postdoc. So take it away, Jay.
Cheers, thank you very much, Andrew. I guess you can see my screen now.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for inviting me, and well done all you guys for organizing this very nice workshop. I was invited to talk about being a postdoc and my experiences of the academic system. So like Andrew says, firstly, I trained as an electronic engineer at University College London. Here we are in front of the Portico building. This is a really broad and exciting degree on all aspects of electronics, but also right through to solid state physics and quantum mechanics. And following this, I had a studentship at CERN in Geneva. The CERN summer studentship, I couldn't recommend more, meeting people from all over the world and working on some of the most astounding pieces of engineering. So this is the Atlas detector in a 26-kilometer tunnel underground. And my idea was to put a layer of graphene on this muon detector and see if it could improve its signal resolution. After that, I had a Kennedy Memorial Scholarship to study quantum engineering at MIT. The Kennedy is a funny thing. Aside from the academic side, you have to dress up and meet all these politicians in DC. And then you give them your travel plans and they will pay for it. So here I am in Chicago, taking an Amtrak train from Boston to LA. Finally, I was offered a place on the quantum engineering CET at Bristol. Had a great first year where we went on tour to whichever prestigious lab or company we could arrange. Here we are at the Cavendish. Then I sat down and wrote my PhD and graduated about 18 months ago. What next? Well, I'm still here tinkering away in the lab at Bristol. This is my lab in the Edwardian wing of the Wills Physics Building. And over the last 5 or 6 years, it's become a second home. So whenever I've been away for a while, I wander around in there and get that coming home feeling. And I'm keen to spend at least, let's say, 3 more years in here. Currently, no other job would give me the freedom and resources to do what my line managers let me do in this lab. And I would happily talk to you for hours about the specific science I'm trying to do in this room. I'm not going to talk to you about my research today, though. Instead, what I'm going to try to do is give you some insight into the other bits away from the lab that make up the fledgling career of a postdoc. So this is roughly what the last couple of years have looked like. Firstly, a postdoc's job is to do experiments and disseminate research. So I write papers and try to get them published. A postdoc is not a permanent job, it's a short-term job. So if you want to do a very specific project, it's on you to keep that project funded. So I'm writing fellowships, which are personal pots of money, and standard grants, which are usually in the name of a full academic. Then if you think you might want to become an academic, to get some experience, you need to do some teaching. preparing and delivering lectures for undergraduates and master's students. Now, this isn't a cherry-picked list. It just so happens half these boxes are red, half of them are green. Actually, I think there's one more red than there is green. A green box means success. A red box means not being successful in an application. If there's one thing to take away from this talk, the more boxes you have, the more likely you are to have a green box, okay? And time is along the x-axis here. It's also true to say the more time spent, the more opportunities there are to have a green box. So today I'm going to give you some exposure to what these boxes look like. Let's look at this first box. This is November 2019. Just a few months into my postdoc, I've submitted a paper as first and corresponding author, and we were quite excited about this work. So I submitted it to a fairly prestigious journal. Here's the single review I got back. Rate the importance of this paper 1, unimportant. Significance, lowest. Novelty, lowest. Broad interest, lowest. It appears that publication in any form would be premature at this time. This was quite a shocking review. They really didn't like it. Oh dear, maybe I can't be a scientist. Then you take a day and look at the science content of the review, which is quite difficult at first. You have to strip away the emotive language. You know, they're actually using words like alarmingly. You realize the reviewer hasn't understood the work at all. And secondly, in their haste to bin the work, the review makes quite a few scientific mistakes. You know, alarmingly, the authors perform measurement X and fit model Y, which is, you know, exactly the right thing to do. So I wrote a calm but scientific rebuttal, and the editor said, if we get a bad review, we can't look into it again. So this was a poor experience. We have a theory that the editor was in fact the reviewer. In this game, you just have to wise up that people can completely rubbish your work. Probably the reviewer was having a miserable day. I submitted the paper to another journal. In the second journal, the two reviewers had one critical comment between them, and it was quickly accepted and put as a featured article. Let's jump to the next paper I wrote. Here's another rejection letter. We spent a lot of time addressing reviewer B's comments. I didn't really understand what reviewer A wanted. Sometimes it's difficult to know, you know, what they're getting at. We addressed their comments, obviously superficially. And here the editor says the review process finishes now. My line manager told me, you know, we have to submit the paper to another journal. But actually, if you read between the lines, this isn't an out-and-out rejection. I put myself in the reviewer's head and eventually grasped what they were getting at. I did some more analysis and actually substantially improved our results. They came back and happily supported it. This was a very positive outcome. Let's move on to funding. Now, this is different. Quite often the reviewers of early career fellowships in particular are generalists. You know, they're not academics in your field, and their criteria is a bit sort of ethereal. The first one I applied for was the doctoral prize. The interview went really very, very well. Unfortunately, I didn't get it. However, the key thing, like with publishing, is the feedback. In this case, I don't think the feedback is helpful, really, particularly these lines in yellow. You should develop plans for your steps towards independence. Your plans were too ambitious and challenging. It's pretty difficult to develop independence without proposing ambitious plans. They also suggest applying for this Royal Academy of Engineering Fellowship instead. The RAE is really a much more advanced fellowship for those who have a few years of postdoc experience and about 10 papers. Anyway, I applied for it. Yes, the panel says I was too early. This bit is good advice. I should start winning my own little pots of money. These guys told me to apply for the 1851 Research Fellowship, so I applied for it. In the setup of most fellowships, the school has to pay a percentage of their overheads, so they can only support a certain amount of candidates. Here there was another candidate. If there wasn't, maybe I would have been lucky. So 3 rolls of the die here, and so far, no luck. Every time you write one of these things, though, it gets better. Your ideas mature and develop. And taking the time to do this helps a hell of a lot with working out what you should be doing in the lab. That first doctoral prize committee said my plans were too ambitious for a 2-year fellowship. So I cheekily recycled them in for a 1-year proposal to this grant committee. This got rejected too, but they basically said I could go again if I gave them some simulations to back up the claims of the proposal. So this is a much more technical panel with an understanding of the impact of the work. And they asked if I try a 2-stage approach with the second part contingent on the first part working. So I did the simulations and resubmitted and won the cash. So this was pretty great, actually. It keeps me in the job for another 18 months, and not just in the job, but doing some really exciting new research. I also took the advice of the RAE committee and applied for a small pot of money, 50,000 euros, and won that. This was also really cool. This is to get some photonics chips made by IMEC. If we look back at the graph, it's definitely the case the red boxes made the green boxes happen. So the message here is to take every single crazy opportunity that you can. Failure leads to success, leads to failure, leads to success. And even before my postdoc, I'd worked this out. So I was planning a PhD in Cambridge. I had the supervisor and the college place. I needed to get the funding. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. The administrator emailed back 5 minutes later saying that they'd made an error, which got my hopes up again, but it was to say they had told me that the interview that I had been on a different date to the one it had been on. So no luck there. Looking back, when I was a teenager, I had an interview to read engineering at Oxford. It was a bitterly cold December day. If you've taken A-level maths, there are various mechanics maths problems where you have to draw a ball on a slope and work out its forces. I kept drawing the slope through the middle of the ball. I didn't get in. But I ended up in a much more engaging course in an amazing city. And during the end of my degree, I applied to spend the summer in London doing research. I didn't get the position. A few weeks later, I did get a summer in Geneva at CERN. I applied for a Fulbright scholarship to MIT. I didn't get it. A few weeks later, I got to go to MIT on a far cooler Kennedy scholarship that paid for my travel across the country. The same with that standard Cambridge PhD. The quantum engineering CDT in Bristol is a far superior thing. It was a wonderful experience in terms of career and also personally living in this wonderful city of Bristol. The whole thing is about taking every crazy opportunity that comes to you. You can't just take singular opportunities. So here's another example. A Russian scientist visited our university when I was in the first year of my PhD. And I gave him a tour of the lab. And we got on really well. has some quite similar ideas about what needs to be done in this field. So we agreed to collaborate. He messaged me a few months later and said he wanted to apply for another travel program and asked if I could get our university to sign a letter of support. So I said, sure, and started going through the procedures for this. Anyway, just 2 weeks before the deadline, he tells me, actually, it's a bit more than a travel application. It's a full-blown £150,000 grant. And for him to get it, we also have to apply for a mirror grant for the same amount of money. As a first-year PhD student, you can say, you know, this is ridiculous. What is this? Or you can sit down and write an application. And my already overstretched supervisor had to do the financial costings with a week's notice. The upshot is, out of 40 applications across all disciplines for this scheme, we won the funding for our project. And here's some photos of my lab mate and I in Moscow. And this is the Museum of Cosmonautics in Russia, which is probably the best museum I've ever been to in the world. And my initial postdoc was funded from this. In that split second, I could have ignored this slightly unlikely opportunity, but in this game, you have to take it. Okay. So one more story. In this field, it seems that everyone and their dog have started a company. In the second year of my PhD, nothing was working in the lab. So I bunked off to a few entrepreneurship events where I met venture capitalists. One event, the speakers agreed to come on the basis that they were given dinner. And I was chatting to one of them, and he invited me to pitch an idea to him. So I had to sit at the table slightly away from the main event, twiddling my thumbs, whilst these two very rich men proceeded to eat a very tasty looking curry, which must be some sort of metaphor for capitalism. After their meal, I get their business cards and am told to go off and finish my PhD. I'm inspired otherwise. The next week, I find myself as a CTO of a company, and we write an Innovate UK grant. It was a terrible idea. The product definitely didn't work. Here's one of the more positive reviews. If you think scientific reviews are a bit dense, business ones more so. But the opportunity of the process was very useful. And should I want to commercialize my research going forwards, the experience of this, you know, is really going to improve how I'll approach it. I know much more about the criteria. And such things like this, provided you do them once, are rarely a waste of time. So I'll tie up my presentation with a few take-homes. The postdoc is a floaty, undefined part of your career. As with every moment up to this point, grasp the opportunities that present themselves. They will be finite, and not all of them will lead to success, but some will. Rejection, you know, is an important part of this stage, because that's where you get the criticism. You know, that's where you learn. And if there aren't a few rejections, you aren't pushing yourself enough. The postdoc isn't something you should embark on lightly. Like a PhD, you shouldn't just do it because it's the obvious step. Especially at this stage, you know, armed with a PhD, pretty much every other job is either better paid or more stable or both. You have to come into a postdoc knowing specifically what piece of research you want to achieve, and be clear that you are the person over everyone to do this, and know what that will then lead to. Lastly, if you choose to take a postdoc, there's few jobs that give you a high dose of freedom with a low dose of responsibility. So every other job going forwards, there's going to be a lot more administrative work and things you don't really want to do. So enjoy it. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that great talk, Joe. It was yeah, really interesting to hear about your experiences and all the things that you've applied for and some of the stuff that you got. I think it's definitely really important for people to especially at the early stage of their academic careers, to learn that rejection is just a part of it. And even someone who even though you know your research career so far has been quite short, has definitely been successful. So yeah, it's really sort of reassuring to hear that even yeah, intelligent and successful researchers like yourself have faced rejection. We've got a couple of questions coming through. One from Cecile that I'd like to ask is, how do you find a good time balance between applying for funding and doing research?
Yes, certainly. You need to strike a balance. It depends on the situation you're in. I mean, it usually goes in cycles. So you spend a few months applying for something, and then once you have it, you're set for a couple of years. So, you know, I won't need to write anything now for another 2 years. But it does mean that, say, probably the sum total of about a good few months of my postdoc has been spent writing these things. But writing this stuff is, in a way, your research, because once you go back in the lab, your perception of what you were doing before changes. You know, you might drop that experiment that's not really going to lead to anything spectacular.
Yeah.
You could have been fiddling away doing something in that time that just wouldn't lead to anything. You need that sort of critical time to think about your research. I
mean, that's good to hear, because you know, I guess you sometimes it feels like these applications are just bureaucracy for the sake of bureaucracy, but I guess they are actually designed for a reason, and you know, make sure that any research that's being funded is worthwhile doing. So yeah,
I mean, you have to justify why you get the taxpayers' money as well. That's the other side of it. I mean.
Yeah, sure. I guess there's a brief follow-up. Someone's asked in the Q&A, what percentage of your time do you think split between science and applying to stuff? I guess if you could put a number on it.
If we take the last 18 months, maybe 30% applying for stuff. It's hard to tell. You know, you go down tunnels to do grants where you're not necessarily working 9 to 5 as well. You're working weekends. You know, so.
Yeah, of course. Academia is definitely not a job. Well, I guess, you know, as you said, you have quite a lot of flexibility with how you choose your hours, but that means there's more responsibility and
yeah, you're working for yourself. You know, you're like a small businessman, but basically you're not, you know, when you're writing these things, it's for your own ideas and for your own science to be carried forward. So you can't really compare it to hours in the lab sort of thing.
Yeah, sure. So I've just spotted another question that's come in. Lara asks, what are your plans ahead? Are you planning to continue a career in academia?
Yes. But now we have the cash. We really need to go back in the lab and get those results. So we'll see how the next 18 months pan out. But hopefully, we will. Well, there's a certain project I want to do. I'm not sure if it will end up in academia or in the business, but
Okay, cool. So another question. Cyril asks, in academia, it looks like the more you get into a better position, the less you're doing research. You start an academic career doing science and you end up applying for funding and doing administration. If you only want to do research, do you have any advice for what sort of job you should look for? And is academia the only way to sort of do this kind of pioneering research?
Yeah, I mean, in pretty, even in an industrial setting, it's the case that the more experience you get, the more responsibility you'll be given. That's just the fact of any career, I think. I mean, we are engineers. We have a PhD. It's our job to come up with the ideas and the projects, really.
Yeah.
You might prefer to go down a technical role, a technical education, and be a technician is another career you could do, but this is a bit of a separate career stream to the stream of the engineer, which is
Yeah, sure. I think there are some, I think larger companies sometimes do have positions that are sort of senior, that are more kind of, involved in just the science side of things and less to do with project management.
People though, you would be, be writing reports on how you've done, and you can't really escape all that side of things, I don't think.
Yeah, sure. One question that you perhaps might be able to answer, but if not, that's all right. Do you know of sort of what grants exists for PhD students that PhD students can apply to fund their PhDs?
To fund their PhDs? Well, normally PhD students, if you want to be a PhD student, my advice would be to look for a CDC program, and you're already funded, but you also have a bit of autonomy and a bit more experience to find out which specific project you get to do. There's also travel bursaries and things you can get during your PhDs, like certain conferences like Leo, for instance. You can apply for a travel bursary.
Yeah, sure. I think the CDT is great if you know, well, if you don't know what you want to do, or even if you do know what you want to do, because you get some funding and then it's attached specifically to you and not to a specific project. So if you don't know what you want to do, then your first year you get to think about it a bit more and learn a bit more about the field before you decide. And if you do know what you want to do, that's great, because a supervisor doesn't have to find funding specifically to take you on as a student. You've already got your own funding. But yeah, great. Thank you for the talk, Joe. It was not quite what I was expecting, but yeah, absolutely brilliant. I definitely learned a lot, and it was great for you to be so open and honest with all your applications.